Hey, son.
Howdy.
I saw the greatest Ferrari movie ever. While I was in lockdown, I watched The Hidden. It's 1987. It stars Kyle MacLachlan from Twin Peaks. It's like a B-grade Terminator movie. For unexplained reasons, this alien takes over human bodies and just has fun killing people. But for reasons I'm not quite sure, they gave the director money to race and drive and destroy multiple Ferraris. It had no real connection to the movie. I just think the director had some sort of Ferrari fetish, and they gave him the money to do this. But he put together a good movie. I loved it. Called The Hidden. Definitely recommend.
I might have to watch it. I have recently watched all 6 Terminator movies. I didn't even know there were 6. So,
I didn't either.
Terminator-esque, I don't know if I'm ready for right now, but I'll keep The Hidden in mind.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say The Hidden is better than at least 4 Terminator movies.
Well, what I was going to say is there's only 2 Terminator movies that you need to watch, and they're the first 2. So,
okay, are you ready?
I'm ready to go.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, an American take on Formula One. This is our very first episode of 2023, and it is a special one, our second annual Formula One Awards show. We call them the Effies. I think we should get right to it, son, because the Effies are the grandest award in all of motorsport. The best, the biggest, the most, and the worst from F1 2022. Why don't we start off with a big one? Let's not keep the audience waiting. The biggest F1 story of 2022. What do you got?
Oh, man. This is a big one. I think the Golden Globes and the Grammys and stuff, they save this for the end, but we're starting it right off.
Lights out.
So many interesting, exciting discussion points this season. Lots of big stories. And we can mention all of them, but that would take our entire show. So I'll just get right into it and say my biggest story of the 2022 F1 season is Mercedes ended P3 in the Constructors' Championship. They had the better part of a decade of Formula One dominance. And this season, their driver lineup is the best it's been in well over 5 years. They ended P3. That to me is shocking. That if you told me that at the beginning of the season, I would not have believed you. And for that reason alone, it's my biggest story of the season.
Nice.
That's just it. It was unfathomable to me that happened, and I have to applaud Red Bull and Ferrari for what they put together in the season.
Yeah, the new regs definitely did what they were designed to do, which was open up competition. For me, the biggest F1 story of 2022, I thought about this. One was Mercedes' performance. One was all the Ferrari failures. I mean, Ferrari started off the year with possibly the best car. The porpoising and the new regulations were another big story. And then I also think the driver moves. There were some shocking driver moves. Ricciardo out, Schumacher out. Nick DeVry drives himself literally into an F1 starting position for 2023. The whole Piastri fiasco, and Alonso leaving, and Seb leaving. Alonso going to, who's Alonso going to?
Aston.
He's going to Aston, right?
Yeah.
He's leaving Alpine. Gasly's going to Alpine. Seb is out, leaving Aston, out of F1. Hulkenberg is going to be back. So, as you could see, my excitement for me, the biggest story was driver moves in 2022. This is an elite group of athletes. F1 is the pinnacle of motor racing. There are only 20 drivers. Some have to pay their way in. And so I think bigger than Mercedes' failure to some extent, bigger than Max repeating, to me, the big story is the driver moves.
I think that's a good one. I mean, we've seen throughout the years lots of drivers come and go, and this season's no different. It's very interesting to see how things shake out and will shake out next season. I imagine there's going to be a lot more sort of chaos in that department next season as well.
And we're recording this before Lewis has re-signed with Mercedes. I'm sure it's going to be a blockbuster deal, probably him racing for 2 to 3 more years, for example, then sort of being an ambassador, brand ambassador for them. I could see this a 10-year deal with him being a brand ambassador going to $300 million. So that's another part of this. Our next award, the biggest disappointment in 2022. I'll start with this one because I thought, Ferrari screw ups, Daniel Ricciardo, Mercedes, some of these things we've touched on as part of the biggest story. The failures, I think, of AlphaTauri and McLaren, they just got worse. For me, the biggest disappointment, however, was Ferrari. Started out in testing, started out the first few races so good, so much potential. That car was just so fast. They have a great veteran lineup, really, of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, and they completely blew it. And Max and Red Bull wound up dominating the season. So I think Ferrari, for me, was the biggest disappointment.
That's interesting. There were plenty of disappointments, along with all the awesome things that happened this season. You mentioned some drivers, some teams. I think the lack of consistency in just the sort of rules that the FIA puts forward, that the stewards sort of enforce throughout the season, was a bit of a disappointment to me. I think they need to do a better job in certain situations. We had many a discussion throughout the season on that, but my biggest disappointment is also going to be a team, and that team has to be Williams. Once again, we're just woeful. They scored a grand total of 8 points this season. Haas, the lowliest of lowly teams, scored 37. That's unacceptable. Williams, they just look like a team that doesn't even care. Alex Albon and Nick DeVries did all that they could to claw points for that team. And Nick DeVries only raced once. There's a whole discussion currently happening in F1 about the introduction of potentially a new team when that the Andrettis are backing. And there are a lot of people in and around F1 that are dismissing that don't want that to happen. And I say, why the hell not? If you're letting Williams continue to compete in this competition, why would you not want somebody who is passionate and adamant about the sport, who wants to win? Right. So to me, the biggest disappointment this season has to be Williams and their just sort of lack of anything that looks like competitiveness.
Yeah, I mean, the Williams brand It's just so iconic, such a part of F1. Excuse me, for it to be this bad for this many years is just, it's sad to watch. Excuse me, Patrick. And I mean, you mentioned the Andretti bid. It's an insider outsider take, and you need to have somebody in charge who can rule for the best interests of F1 long term. It's sort of like people living in San Francisco. If you own a home in San Francisco, you're sitting on a lottery ticket, and there's absolutely no way you want them to build more houses, more condos, more apartments in San Francisco. Everybody outside of San Francisco says, of course, you need to build more. No one can afford here. No one can stay here. You have to build more. It's an insider-outsider view, but you need somebody, for example, in F1 to sort of make the call, what's in the best interests of F1 long-term. Definitely adding another team is part of that, I think. But yeah, Williams is running out of excuses. Okay. Related, the biggest driver failure of 2022. It could be a single race, a single lap, a season. That's up to you. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, there's for me, it's a little bit hard to say. I think there were several drivers that had clumsy mistakes, poor races, what have you. I think ultimately the biggest driver failure this season was Sergio Perez not finishing P2. Red Bull ended up being dominant over the course of the entire season. Ferrari and Leclerc had sort of failure after failure. Leclerc himself had a number of just mistakes on his part. And the reason I didn't pick Leclerc for this is because ultimately none of them mattered. He still finished P2 where he would have, even if he hadn't made any of those mistakes. He was well enough behind Verstappen, he was never going to beat him. Perez, on the other hand, even with Leclerc and Ferrari faltering as they did, still did not come P2 in a car that, frankly, Max showed was better. That, to me, is a failure on his part. And it's getting to the point now where Red Bull, I think, have a Valtteri Bottas on their team, and they probably don't want to change that in the near future until it starts hurting them. But for me, Perez was very disappointing this season, and ultimately I think his failure to get P2 was the biggest driver failure of the season.
Wow. We probably should give out an award to only one award per category, but really, since we're setting the rules, we can each give an award. I did not even have Perez in this category, but I'm now thinking maybe you're right. I've considered, for example, Pierre Gasly, who had a bit of a drop off. Daniel Ricciardo, just a terrible drop off in performance. I mean, he looked lost at times. He's been in F1 for a decade, and he was looking lost out there. I even briefly considered Lewis Hamilton. I mean, the fact that Lewis Hamilton would finish second in Mercedes to a young guy, first year on the team, to me is shocking. There were some mitigating circumstances of that, however. I think Lewis knew that car was not going to compete, so he thought, all right, I'll just focus on how we improve this car to get to the end of the season and then into 2023. I think you make a good case about Sergio Perez, however. I'm still going to go with Nicholas Latifi. In a terrible car, he was terrible. He did not look like he deserved a seat in F1. The fact that someone would come in and replace him with essentially next to zero practice time in that car and do far better, which Nick DeVry did, I think is embarrassing to the point where you almost sort of have to resign. So I think Sergio Perez is a good one, but I'm going to go biggest driver fail, Nicholas Latifi. Now, biggest team fail. I suspect we are both going to agree on this, but who do you have for biggest team fail in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those categories where, you have a few nominees, but ultimately there's only one choice. I think the biggest team fail has to be Ferrari. They put together a wonderful car. It was fast. It was maybe furious. They had a great driver lineup. Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc are both extremely talented drivers. Maybe they get in their own way occasionally, but that was not helped by the team. They chose essentially to screw themselves on many an occasion, and it ultimately made the race in the Constructors' Championship and frankly, even the Drivers' Championship not close. They wasted speed and potential at the beginning of the season. They jumped out to a massive lead with several Red Bull DNFs at the start of the season and a few Ferrari wins, and squandered that over the course of the season. And frankly, that was just... it was kind of tragic to watch unfold almost. But yeah, absolutely. Biggest team fail for me has to be Ferrari.
Yeah, no point in wasting time here. I have Ferrari also. I considered, well, what about Mercedes? As you said before, they were dominant for a decade. They came in with this no pods design, dropped to P3, only one win in the whole year, despite having a very good and the most reliable car. Some of the Sergio and Max nastiness I thought was a bit of a team failure. Alpine losing both Fernando Alonso and their young up-and-coming groomed driver Oscar Piastri on the same day. But it's got to be Ferrari. I think over the course of the season, we can maybe say Red Bull was as good or better, but certainly at the start of the season, Ferrari had the best car. They've got a great driver lineup. They could have been competitive essentially every race, and they just found ways to ruin their season. It's just, it's sad, really. Biggest surprise in F1 in 2022, Patrick. I'm going to go first because, we touch on a lot of these. Mercedes looking so bad, Red Bull being so dominant. Here they are. They fought to the bitter end in 2021 to give Max a win, spent almost no time focusing on the 2022 car, and yet they come out, this amazing car. They have a dominant season. That was a big surprise to me. Max being just so dominant despite the early DNFs. Kevin Magnussen being brought back on such short notice. We thought he was done at Haas, done at F1. That was great. And I have difficulty coming up with a winner for this. I even considered the whole porpoising issue and Toto Wolff, Mercedes team principal, getting F1 to sort of allow for some minor design changes that obviously benefit Mercedes the most. That was a surprise that after putting so much effort into the new regulations, they made some changes so quickly. For me, though, biggest surprise was just the complete dominance of Red Bull. They won the driver championship, they won the constructors championship, and it wound up not being close.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I was surprising, I think, to see that, but I think there are a lot of surprising things throughout the season. And, you know, Magnussen and Haas sort of not being utterly terrible, I think, was kind of surprising. I mean, a pole for Magnussen was extremely surprising. I think sort of the step back that McLaren took this season was surprising. For me, this one also was challenging to sort of decide, but one of my biggest surprises this season had to be just sort of the chaos at Alpine. Like throughout the season, it seemed like Alonso and Ocon never seemed to get along. They were kind of throwing shots back and forth at each other. Alonso decides to leave mid-season, seemingly blindsiding the team. All hell breaks loose there. Piastri totally spurns them, and decides to go to McLaren on potentially a whim. But then there was the whole debate: did he tell anybody? Did he not tell anybody? Blah blah blah. And then, near the end of the season, Alonso and Ocon are clashing as teammates. Ocon is saying things about Alonso that, he's bad for the team. He doesn't do any work, et cetera, et cetera. I just think the team that finished, what were they, fourth in the Constructors' Championship?
I think so, yep.
Was just utter chaos the whole season. And for them to then go on, finish fourth ahead of McLaren, I think, for me, that was the biggest surprise.
All right, nice. Yeah, who knows the whole Alpine team? Who knows what's going on there? and Pierre Gasly, and who will be with the team in 2023, they does not seem to get along well with Esteban Ocon. Although, to be fair to Pierre Gasly, no one seems to get along well with Esteban Ocon. So we'll see how that continues. Now, biggest impact on Formula One in 2022: person, thing, technology. What do you think? What had the biggest impact on the sport in 2022?
That's a very interesting one. I have to say, I think the new regulations absolutely had a major impact on this season. For me, though, I have to go with just overall American interest in the sport. This seems to be a growing trend. And I think the sport and just American interest in general is taking foothold in the sport. And it's resulted in more people watching, more viewership, more races in the States. I think for me, that has the biggest impact currently on Formula One, is just American interests in it, potentially an 11th team being brought to the sport. It's kind of crazy the direction that the sport has taken in the last even just 5 years. And I think a lot of that has to do with Americans becoming more interested in it and stakeholders in the sport.
Yeah, I had that on my list, potential winner for biggest impact on Formula One. And, in 2023, there'll be 3 races in the U.S. Logan Sargent will be an American driver. We have Haas, American team. We might have an Andretti team soon. Drive to Survive really helped boost the popularity. When we started this podcast, it was an American take on Formula One because it didn't really exist, kind of an American perspective. And it's just amazing to see the growth in interest in America in Formula One. This one was a tough category for me because to me, the two biggest things were the new regulations, which were designed to make cars more competitive, add more overtakes, which is what everyone wants to see, and the spending cap. And I do believe the spending cap, especially as more money comes into Formula One, and so all the teams will be able to spend up to the spending cap, but not over it, I think that will have a radical impact on the sport. I think we will see, let's say, an Andretti team competing for podiums, a Haas team competing for podiums. We could see McLaren winning the Constructors' Championship, for example, just within 2 or 3 more years. But I think for 2022, it was the new regulations. They opened up a lot of the design elements, and so we saw cars looking different. We saw Mercedes fall to 3, McLaren stumbling, Haas ascending. We did see more overtakes, so I have the new regulations. That was my winner. Now, this one might be a little easier. Best rookie of Formula One 2022.
This is an interesting one. Because we had one rookie complete a season, and there was only Zhou, and there was only one other driver that had any seat time as a rookie, and that was Nick DeVries. And frankly, he had one of the best performances of this season in his only drive. To me, though, I think, Zhou had a very good start to his season as well. Then, throughout the season, he looked like a rookie. And I don't blame him for that. I don't think he looked poor, just like a rookie. I have to give him Rookie of the Year. I don't know if Nick DeVries would have done anything more if he had competed in a full season. So, I would feel just not right giving it to him. But
right. This should be easy because Zhou was the only rookie driver signed for the season. And he did have some rookie mistakes and didn't really have much impact on any of the races. But he was in a middling car, and it was his first year, and I thought he did fine. But I'm going to go against you and choose Nick DeVries. This young man, he's been waiting in the wings for about 6 years. He's won an FP2. He's won Formula E. He's working with Mercedes. He's worked with other cars. He gets the call up. He knows this could be his one and only chance to ever become an F1 driver. He gets in a terrible Williams car and has a great drive. As good, I think, as any drive Albon has had in Williams. Maybe there's 1 or 2 Albon has had better, but he's been there now for a few years. And Nick DeVries somehow got Williams into the points and got himself a signed deal. So he'll be driving in 2023. So I got to give it to him. He's my top rookie for 2022. Now, I'm going, spoiler alert, because I have no winner in this next category. That is most improved driver of 2022. And I tried to think who really impressed me, who took a step up in 2022. And I could not come up with an answer. Maybe it was because with the new regulations, the cars were so different. It took so much time for everyone to sort of really maximize what they could get out of their car. But I I don't think any F1 driver this year really stepped up.
That's interesting. I'll tell you my winner. My winner is Max Verstappen. And that is because I think he did improve the way he drives. I think he's more confident than he was even in 2021 when he won the championship over Lewis Hamilton. I think he is calmer, and I think he makes better decisions than he did in 2021. I think you're right. It was maybe a little bit hard to come up with drivers who really improved vastly over their previous seasons. I think guys like Lando Norris and George Russell could be on this list. I think they both proved themselves well, and I think are still improving as young drivers. But for me, Max Verstappen, he looked in 2021 extremely good. That's why he won the championship. But I think if he had the same demeanor as he did in 2022, he would have won that season, 2021, much earlier than the final race.
Well, interesting. We'd be robbed of a lot of controversy if that were the case, however. So that was most improved driver. Who do you have for most improved team, Patrick?
That also is a very interesting one, because I think, there were teams that improved and teams that really faltered. I think Red Bull should be on this list. They were so dominant this season, and I think improved overall as a team than they were in 2021. Ferrari, I definitely believe that they improved their car. I mean, it might not be a total team improvement since they just had so many issues. And then I think Haas naturally comes to mind. They were so bad, scored 0 points in 2021. A rookie lineup that just looked completely lost, chaotic, ruined other drivers' races. And this year, they looked far more determined. And they scored 37 points, like I mentioned earlier. That's a big improvement, I think, for them. And to not finish, last or close to last in the constructors, I think my most improved team has to be Haas.
Nice. For 2023, Haas will have Magnussen and Hülkenberg. I think that's a strong lineup. They have a sponsor and claim now that they will be able to spend up to the amount of the spending cap. They've got a close relationship with Ferrari, who's proven that their engine can go fast. I'm not sure they will take much of a leap in 23, but I think by 24, we might be seeing Haas legitimately compete for podiums. I did have them amongst my most improved teams in 2022. I mean, they obviously took a huge step up, 30-some points. I also had Alpine. Alpine should not have come in fourth. As you mentioned, a lot of the inner turmoil with their drivers, Ocon and Alonso. They did not have the best engine, but they stepped up. And then I also considered Mercedes. We were all shocked that Mercedes was not competing for podiums every week, as they had been for 10 years. But their car was the most reliable for the season, and they kept improving it and kept improving it. Near the end of the season in Brazil, they took 1 and 2. If the season were a little bit longer, I think they would have come in second place, eclipsing Ferrari. And I think we should assume they will come in at least second place in 2023, given that steady rate of improvement throughout this year. But I'm going with you. Haas, most improved team. Yeah, I mean, they really did, I think, just more than any other team, really progress. And that was great to see. Related to most improved team, this award, best team in Formula One in 2022. I will continue. I considered Red Bull. I mean, Max won. They won the constructors. It was really runaway. I considered Mercedes because they have just such a stellar driver lineup. George Russell, Lewis Hamilton. They've got great, just a great paddock. Total Wolff has really turned them into a well-oiled machine. I also thought Alpine again, but because they just did so much better than I think we expected them to. But as we've discussed, there's a lot of that driver turmoil, and I think that cost them something. So for me, best team, Mercedes, George Russell, Lewis Hamilton.
That's very interesting. Yeah, this is an interesting category as well. I think if we're looking at overall team performance and just sheer dominance, you have to look at Red Bull. They really just sort of hammered everybody after those first three races. And, it just looked like an absolute beatdown where by the end of the season, all other teams were worn out. I mean, they were sort of ready to keep going. So I think, Red Bull with Max and ultimately Perez is that other guy that he's just there and he scoops up points because he's in a wonderful car and he's an acceptable driver. He's a solid driver. I just think he should do better. For me, I would say Ferrari were the best team, at least in terms of driver lineup. Leclerc and Sainz are both extremely talented. I think they both raced very well throughout most of the season. And they did have a few mistakes here and there. But I think the same can be said of the Mercedes drivers. The same can be said of the Red Bull drivers and pretty much any other lineup on the grid. For me, I think Ferrari did a great job this season in terms of their drivers, and I expect them to continue next season. I just hope that Fred Vasseur gets that team sort of well organized and actually puts the fight to Mercedes and Red Bull.
Yeah, Ferrari is such the glamour team. Charles and Carlos are such the glamour racing teammates. But this year most of what we saw with Ferrari was sort of the unsightly, unglamorous, strategic blunders and internal blunders. And so that's why I didn't choose them, but I do think they're a worthy pick. Related to best team is best teammate. I tried to think what qualities go into best teammate. Share knowledge, defend when the other driver is ahead, not crash, costing teams precious resources in a spending cap era, not saying anything negative about the teammate publicly or even alluding to anything negative. So this one was tough for me. I considered, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz. I thought Sergio Perez. He cleared the way for Max to win. He rarely said anything negative, but at one time he did, and it was very public. I also thought You know, Kevin Magnussen, he got brought back in kind of very late notice, drove very well, and seemed to be, if not ready to help Mick Schumacher, not do anything that would hinder his spot, his chance in Formula One. I'm going to go with Kevin Magnussen on this one. He never said anything bad about Haas. He never said anything bad about the car, really. Not about Mick Schumacher. I think he did his job. He did what was best for the team, and he never harmed Mick Schumacher and so his teammate. So I'm going to go with Kevin Magnussen, though this one was a tough one for me.
I think that's a very good pick. I have another guy who I believe had very similar qualities to Kevin Magnussen, and that is Sir Lewis Hamilton. I think he drove very well for Mercedes. He was clearly very frustrated early in the season, but I think he sort of figured out what his job was during this season. And seemed to me like all he ever did was help and support George Russell. And that to me had to be extremely difficult for, one of the greatest drivers of all time to have this young kid come in and he's good and he's beating you. I think late on in the season, Hamilton finally kind of found his footing and started to come back. But to sort of swallow his pride and support Russell and the team throughout the season the way that he did, I think he deserves this award, best teammate.
Yeah, all of these F1 drivers are prima donnas, but it would be like if, a team brought in a young rookie quarterback and said, "Hey, Tom Brady, this is going to be our future guy. Can you help him out?" And Tom Brady actually being gracious about it. So yeah, Lewis Hamilton definitely is a deserving winner of that award. And now, since I have the mic, I'm going to give out a very special Golden Effie Award to Christian Horner, team principal at Red Bull. If Red Bull wins just 8 races in 2023, they become only the 5th team to win 100 races. There's Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, and Williams. Only 4 teams in 70-odd years of racing. I also think Horner has put together the best team. Max as the best driver. They've got Adrian Newey designing. They've got the best strategist, usually the best pit crew. They've won now, 5 constructors, 6 drivers titles, I think. He's been there from the very beginning. He's built that team. They're now in the process of building power units. I think Christian Horner is going to go down as one of the most impactful people in the history of the sport, more so even than Frank Williams, than Ross Brawn. He's going to be up there. And so I'm giving a special Golden Effie to Christian Horner, Patrick.
I think that is well-deserved.
Now, speaking of Christian Horner, 2 things that fuel the world, not F1, but vengeance and pettiness. Vengeance and pettiness always get our attention. We can't help ourselves. We're only human. So, best petty moment in F1 in 2022, Patrick. Do you have anything?
I think the most petty driver and the one driver who just doesn't give a fuck is Fernando Alonso. And I have to say the was it Belgium where Hamilton and him collided? And he said something about Hamilton to the effect that he only knows how to drive from the front of the grid. Just putting that out into the world, I think, is funny for one, but also very petty. I think Alonso clearly holds himself in very high regard. And, I think in another lifetime, he would have been where Hamilton is in terms of just his sheer ability in a Formula One car. And I think, that irks him. And so, for him to throw out little petty comments like that, I'm sure throughout the season, but especially that one that was very obvious over the radio during a race. I think that was probably the best pettiness we saw this season.
Oh, these drivers know that their radio messages are going to get out into the world. Hamilton saying a race is being manipulated. They know that's going to get out there and it's going to stick in people's brains. And I forced myself to think of various pettinesses, if we want to call them that, throughout the season. Max refusing to let Sergio go by, even though it had zero impact on Max's season and would have helped Sergio, his teammate, and the team. Sergio, going on the radio saying, oh, that's who he is, or he knows, we all know who he is, But really, there was nothing like what Alonso said, because we all think there might be some truth to it, and it all is just such a vicious, nasty bit of pettiness that never should have even been said. But we still think about it. So that one, I have to go. I'm with you. Alonso's dig at Hamilton. He only knows how to drive from the front of the grid. That was the best moment of pettiness for the whole season. What about, on a more serious note, the best moment for the Formula One 2022 season?
Best moment. I think I got to say when I won across the line, that might have been the best moment.
So across the line is when we choose our picks for the next race and we tally up all the points for the season. That was a close one.
It was close. But no, there were so many awesome things that happened this season. Just from the very outset, the very first race, Bahrain, was kind of a nail biter. It was crazy. It was exciting. Just the excitement for what was to come throughout the season, I think, was awesome. Kevin Magnussen finishing 5th place in that race at the start of the season, to see Haas up there was fantastic. Once again, his pole position was pretty amazing. Then we saw Alonso go airborne in Austin, and then have an insane race after that and finish, P7 or something like that.
Right. That was amazing.
But I think the best moment was right at that start of the season in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, to see Ferrari and Red Bull and Mercedes to some extent battling together, Leclerc and Max going head to head. We saw lots of drivers up and down the grid fighting for positions. We kind of expected this to be an incredible season. And I think, that was probably the best moment of the whole season, was just the excitement that you felt at the start.
Yeah, I really wanted to make that my best moment of 2022. there was so much promise in there. The young drivers, Charles and Max, was a changing of the guard after a decade of Mercedes dominance. Both drivers are great. Both cars were fast. We thought, wow, the new regs, new young drivers, not new, but younger drivers. This is going to be great. 2022 is going to be one of the best seasons ever. But Max is just so incredibly good, and Ferrari made so many mistakes under pressure that promise sort of faltered. So I couldn't give that award, best moment, to those early season battles. I thought of Alonso and Austin. Alonso getting on the front row. I mean, guy's in his 40s, and he's in a mid-pack car. Magnussen getting pole, I think it was in Sao Paulo. Nick DeVry with that race in Monza, just to score himself an F1 seat. But I think for me, I'm going to give it to what I call the Silverstone 5. Silverstone, I guess as they say in England. That was when there were 5 drivers all sort of fighting for position. Hamilton was there. Alonso was there. It was just so much fun. We saw a number of overtakes, the sort of the famous through goes Hamilton line from Crofty. That was just so much fun to watch. And it really held the promise of what I think we're going to be seeing in 2023. Very competitive battles, not only at the front, but also at the middle. And so Silverstone, the Silverstone 5, that's mine.
Awesome.
Now, that was our best moment. What do you think was the worst moment in F1 in 2022?
The worst moment, I think there really was one moment that stood out and probably stands out in most people's minds as the worst thing that happened in 2022. And that has to be in Japan, when all the drivers, not the least of which Pierre Gasly, drove past a big-ass crane on the track in wet conditions where nobody could see it. It was one of those moments where you think this could have been so much worse. And the fact that F1, the FIA, still haven't really learned anything from past incidents that ultimately ended up as fatal accidents, it is really frustrating. And I think to see something like that once again in 2022 is really ultimately the worst thing, and you hope that they figure stuff out, that the F1 and the FIA choose to do something about it. But I think it's really tragic to kind of see that happen again in Japan, and just I don't know. That for me is pretty much the clear worst moment of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a little bit scarred by Jules Bianchi's death, which was completely avoidable in my view. When they had crane out on the track, that was Japan, correct, in the rain, and was just absolutely gobsmacked that we saw this again. There was in the rain again, drivers going past, crane out on the track. I mean, I couldn't fathom that had happened. I considered Zhou's crash, which looked awful at the time. I think that was at Silverstone. And, but he was fine. But yeah, so I'm with you. Seeing a tractor on a crane on the track in the rain at Suzuka was just horrible. Okay, we're going into the home stretch now, Patrick. Best race of 2022.
Best race. There were some
Yeah,
really, really fun ones, I think.
there were, and I considered. I was like, what do I want to see in a race? Wheel to wheel racing, overtakes. Maybe some clear elbows out the way Hamilton and Max do. Possibly even a crash, as long as no one is injured, permanently injured or anything. Maybe a surprise ending. Maybe a team from the mid or even back of the pack getting onto the podium. So I try to consider all of those in mind. So who do you have? What do you have as the best race of 2022?
That is, yeah, it's a tough one. All the things you said, I think there were two races that really stuck out in my mind. The very first race of the season that I mentioned not too long ago, Bahrain. Tons of just good racing. Some sort of crazy things at the end. We got a Max DNF, a Sergio spin. The Mercedes go through. Ferrari's coming home to sort of take the win. K-Mag, P5, just some crazy racing. Was awesome to see. My other one, like you just recently mentioned, Silverstone. Just, again, crazy race. Zhou, at the start, gets sort of flipped over, rides on his halo into a fence. Luckily, everyone was okay from that. George Russell jumps out of his car to go rush over to Zhou to make sure he's okay. The race goes on. It ends in this crazy 5-car battle. Hamilton going through Perez and Leclerc, Max and Sainz, battling it out. Just an awesome race. And I think that ultimately Silverstone, just an iconic track, huge crowd. That cheer as Hamilton went through from the Brits was awesome to see. I think that is my winner for best race of the season.
Yeah, I think probably most fans would have to choose Silverstone for best race of F1 in 2022, which is why I'm going with a dark horse pick. The Empire strikes back in this one, Patrick. I'm choosing Monaco. Monaco is all tradition. It's rarely anymore the best race, the best driving. It's just sort of tradition, media, fun, the glamour. And I think FIA realizes that Monaco is sort of in the final days of being a viable setting for F1. And I think that's part of the reason why they've spent tens of millions building up infrastructure in Las Vegas. I think they want Las Vegas to be what Monaco has been, if it can. And so I think, however, Monaco was that Empire Strikes Back moment. It gave us a lot of drama that we rarely see there. It was rain, Perez crash in qualifying, which later in the season gave us some great pettiness and some inter-team turmoil because Max apparently was pissed that he did that to sort of potentially hold his qualifying position, which screwed Max over. It's Charles's home race. He's there with Ferrari. Ferrari epically screws poor Charles out of a Monaco victory. Somehow Sergio Perez wins. I think that may have been his only win in 2022, and in what we know was a great car. So for me, the dark horse pick, best race 2022, Monaco.
Nice.
Related to best race, best drive. What do you have for best drive? Or what?
best drive is always challenging. I think Alonso's drive in Austin was one of the best drives of the season. Having that incident with Stroll, I thought he was out for the rest of the race. He comes back, finishes P7.
When you see an F1 car go airborne, I mean, it's essentially designed to break up.
Yeah.
The fact that he kept driving that thing was just shocking. I mean that's just so Alonso.
He didn't break his back doing that is insane. So that was crazy. I think we saw some epic drives from Max, of course. I think Leclerc later in the season in Austria had an awesome drive. But for me, I think we alluded to this earlier, but Nick de Vries, P9 in Monza in a Williams at the Temple of Speed, no less, in a car that is anything but speedy. In his first ever Formula One race, gets P9. I don't know if Nicholas Latifi to that point had ever scored points for Williams. Nick de Vries comes in and does it in his first race with the team.
That was amazing.
It was pretty much an unreal drive. So for me, I think that was ultimately the best drive of the season.
I think that I don't award it my best drive of the season, but it certainly is close. I mean, getting Williams into the points, he really had so little time in that car, securing his spot for 2023. What an amazing drive. And so I'm happy for him. I mean, he's really given everything he can to the sport, and it's finally paid off. I also considered, Charles's win in Spielberg. I considered George's win, his first in Sao Paulo. Mercedes sort of finally got everything, and he held on. He held off Lewis Hamilton, and he won. That was great. But for me, as you discussed, Alonso in America, Circuit of the Americas, did he even finish the race was shocking. That he got that car into points after taking it airborne. To me, no, I love Alonso, so I've got to give him best drive 2022. And for our final category, the preeminent Effie, best driver, Formula One 2022. Mine was an easy choice. It is Max Verstappen. I know he had a great car. He has a great team. His teammate is there essentially to help him win. He's, has the sort of the Valtteri Bottas role when Valtteri was driving with Lewis Hamilton all those years. But despite, at least 2 DNFs, or maybe 3, at least 2 DNFs early in the season, Max won 15 races. I mean, that's just shocking to me. And these were cars that were much more competitive than they were in 2019. That he wins 15 races, I just think was shocking. So for me, no point in delaying the inevitable best driver, F1 2022, Max Verstappen.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to tally up our top 5s that we do for each race to see, what we thought throughout the season. But right now, looking back at the total of the 2022 F1 season, I cannot disagree with you. Max Verstappen was just unbelievable. With a great car, he didn't put a foot wrong. Most wins in a single season ever. He's quickly climbing up the leaderboard for most wins in a Formula One career, and he's younger than me. So just unbelievable what he accomplished this season, and what we sort of expect him to continue to accomplish throughout his career.
Yeah, he's younger than my cap, in fact. I have said this before. I think Max Verstappen is to F1 what Michael Jordan was to NBA. You can debate who's the best ever, but I think Max, like Michael Jordan, is going to walk away with all the records. He's going to remake the sport. I think if his car is competitive, he'll win again in 23. He'll win again in 24. Right now, I think this is the sort of the Max Verstappen era of Formula One, like it or not. And so, yep, I think most people would say he was the best driver in 2022. Okay, that's it. We hope you enjoyed our second annual Formula One Awards. As always, thank you for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast, and we are Lights Out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
Hey, good show, son. I'm still recovering. So, lost my voice there a couple times. Good show. Listen, greatest Ferrari movie ever, The Hidden. You've got to watch it. It's really good. It's a fun, great 80s movie. Now, I paired it with one of the greatest movies in cinematic history, starring one of the great wrestlers of all time, Roddy Piper. They Live. Watch The Hidden and They Live. It will be the greatest double feature of your life. I promise you.
Should I go watch Birdemic after that, or what?
No. I'm being serious, Patrick.
Well,